As a shock to completely no one, the weapon immediately exploded. Hey builders, this is Tyler, Team Cryptid Robotics, and today I'm going to tell you about a new antweight undercutter that I made called Wendigo. The idea behind this robot was that it would be really speedy and be an undercutter so I can get at my opponent's wheels, but also have forks in the back so if something happens to my weapon, I'm still able to control the fight, and also have it so my opponent has to worry about me regardless of whether I'm going forwards or backwards. And even though I designed this as a full combat ant, I ran it as a plastic ant at its first event, which it's already been to and which I'm going to tell you about later. Simply 3D printing things that weren't designed to be 3D printed and then running it as a plastic ant didn't actually work out for reasons that will be clear in a moment. But without further ado, let's go into what I was trying to build, and then I'll show you guys what I came up with. First, let's talk about the drive. I wanted to go with tangential drive because I wanted to make it compact and fast. For this, I used the Repeat Robotics tangent motors, and I just mounted it to the side of the robot using the face holes. I am aware of how that the shaft is sort of sticking out probably further than it should, and that's something that I'll change for future designs that use tangential drive. And for the wheels, they're custom molded Vitaflex 40 like all my other robots, and they're mounted using a shoulder bolt going to a square nut on the inside of the chassis. Even though I do have Delrin washers that are sort of keeping the wheels in place and not having too much friction with the side of the robot, I don't super like this way of mounting it because it creates probably more friction than what there should be. And for future robots and iterations that use tangential drive, I'm going to do something different. And for the weapon, I used a super thin 3.5 inch diameter blade that's attached to a pulley that is meant to be 3D printed, and that pulley goes to a 2305 motor, which is the same motor that the Scalar uses, because I figured if it's good enough for a Scalar, it's going to be good enough for this robot. And the reason I decided to use a pulley instead of, say, a hub motor wasn't because I was worried about the motor getting damaged in combat, is more because I wanted to keep the weight in the center of the robot and where the wheels are. And you're probably seeing the thickness of the weapon and how that geometry of the weapon is. I didn't change the geometry of the weapon for the plastic antweight event, and that is pretty obvious what the problem was at the event. Another problem was that I didn't quite size the belts properly, and I didn't leave myself enough room to work with to be able to print off a bunch of different size of pulleys. So at the event, I ended up putting like some electrical tape on the outside of the pulley on the weapon to give it just enough friction for it to actually work. But if I end up revisiting this design, I'm definitely gonna have to rework that. And in the back of the robot, I have forks that are meant to be invertible, because that is a common weakness of undercutters, is that they generally really don't like being knocked upside down. So I figured by having the forks in the back be invertible, that would sort of mitigate that weakness at least a little bit. And like I mentioned before, if the weapon goes down, then I still can stay in the fight and get points and do something meaningful to my opponent. And for the rest of the electronics in the robot, I used a 380 milliamp hour 3S battery, a fingertech switch, and an ER4 receiver. I've sort of been switched to ELRS for all of my robots, at least the main ones. I actually had to reprint the chassis at least 3 or 4 times to fit all of the electronics, because that is apparently my toxic trait, is making my robots entirely too small, which is probably why every single one of my robots is way underweight, at least for its first iteration, with the exception of Ozark Howler. I also tried to make it as short as possible, which definitely was a chore and maybe ill-advised, but I wanted to make it invertible, so I wanted the tires to be the max height of the robot, and the bigger the tires are, the more weight it is, especially if you want to have urethane tires. So it had to be as short as I could make it, and the constraining factor mostly became the weapon motor, and also just having all the electronics fit inside of there. After I 3D printed everything and made sure everything fit, I ran Wendigo as a plastic ant up in Hastings at RSL. I also ran Hodag at that event, so if you want to check the video out on how my beetle weight Hodag did, check this video out here. That was kind of my primary focus at that event, and I mostly want, and Wendigo was just sort of to me, try it out. See, I know I designed it, but I was having second guesses on whether I wanted it to replace Bigfoot as my primary ant, but I wanted to give it at least some sort of shot since I went through the effort to go through the CAD. And with that said, our first fight is against a 4-wheel drive lifter called Lyfta. It's by an experienced builder, so I'm assuming this is not going to be a pushover.
Well, the belt wasn't an issue.
Exactly. It won't be an issue at all.
As expected, our weapon immediately exploded, so we were basically a wedge that entire match. And since I didn't quite have very good control of my robot, since I am not used to the tangential drive and I didn't get really much chance to tweak the drive since I was getting this ready pretty last minute, you can tell that I sort of get used to the drive as the match goes on, but still also the forks are really bouncy. I didn't really figure out the drive in time to really get enough pins in to overcome the fact that my weapon is completely gone and that he was flipping me like a pancake for the entire first half of the match. Unsurprisingly, we end up losing that judge's decision. And that takes us into our second fight against Pepperoni Punch, which is a 4-wheel drive shell spinner. In the past, this robot has been known to sort of take itself out, so I figure if we can survive long enough, maybe we can win this one. Well, that was pretty anticlimactic. You can sort of tell that even though my opponent can't do anything that entire fight, that I still have troubles just driving this thing straight, especially because it kind of had two fronts to it. So in order for me to go at it with the forks, I essentially have to drive backwards, and I haven't quite gotten used to that yet. But I guess a win's a win. And that'll take us into our third fight, which is against Shadow the Roomba, which is a completely different type of full body spinner, and it's a melty brain. I'm not quite sure how this one's going to go because I don't have a separate wedge as you saw for that one. I don't have a separate wedge configuration, so let's see how this goes.
2, 1, go!
So my strategy was to just ram him and hopefully get him to stop spinning. Hopefully I could corral him in a corner. That didn't quite end up happening. He ended up destroying my forks pretty quickly. Although I don't think they were definitely less durable than the rest of my robot. Although him hitting the forks did lead to him going into the air, so they weren't completely useless. I didn't spin up my weapon because I knew it would just explode, and I didn't want to take any unnecessarily lost to damage points, even though obviously the spinner wasn't going to do anything anyways. Had I been a little bit better at driving, I would have been able to actually stay on him faster and possibly get him to not be able to spin up, but that wasn't the case. They did end up giving me the judge's decision, mostly because I had 100% of the aggression points, and all he could mostly do is spin in a circle, and he didn't have any meaningful movement towards me, and I didn't quite take enough damage. I'm not quite sure what happened with the drive at the end there. I think one of the shoulder bolts got misaligned and it made one of the sides slower, because I didn't have to replace one of the motors. I did have to replace the chassis because I was no longer able to mount forks to that chassis, but it is what it is. And then we go on to our next fight. Our next fight is against Black Cat, which is 4-wheel drive vert. It's a pretty classic 4-wheel drive vert. Hopefully I can actually drive properly in this one, and let's see how it goes.
All right, 30 seconds left in this fight. Black Cat and Wendy Wendigo. Both these spots fighting it out. 10 seconds remaining, wanting to get some last second impressions for the judges. Good pin there from Black Cat right here towards the end. And that's time.
As a shock to completely no one, the weapon immediately exploded, and less expectedly, one of the forks decided that it wasn't going to cooperate and decided to be poking upward for a good chunk of that match, making it a lot more difficult for me to control them. Plus, they, again, didn't seem to always win the ground game. I think that a lot of times they're just kind of light, and so they like to bounce a little bit. Plus, I think this robot lacks pushing power, partially because it weighs much less than the other robots. I think it was 50 to 100 grams underweight, and so I don't have as much traction on the wheels without the weight, and that kind of made it difficult for me to push him around, because I'm a lot easier to push around because I'm lighter. Plus, I don't know why I didn't adjust the steering midway through this event to make it so it didn't turn so quickly. That would have been an easy fix. I don't have a good excuse for that. I think I might have been more focused on Hodag and cared more about Hodag, but I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Overall, for that event, we went 2-2, which isn't terrible considering how many things are wrong with this robot. I also not a huge fan of how long it is. I think if it was a little bit wider than it was long, I think it'd be a lot better. Quick editor's note, I never specified why I thought it'd be better if it was wider. There's two reasons why it would be better. One, more angles that my opponent would come at me. It would be hitting either the weapon or the forks. How it is now, by most angles, you're just kind of going at the side of the robot and getting underneath the wheels instead of hitting the weapon or forks. Also, if it was wider, it would be a lot less jerky on the turning since the wheels would be further apart. The same amount of turning from the wheels would be a much less sharp of angle, thus making it easier to control. Currently, I'm focusing for my main ant. My focus has resorted back to Bigfoot after this event, although I am trying tangential drive with Bigfoot. I think I might revisit this undercutter, but for now I think it's going to be put onto the back burner. I have no plans to like ramp it up to a full ant anytime soon. I might revisit an undercutter, but right now I'm focusing on Bigfoot. Originally this was meant to replace Bigfoot as my primary ant, but leading up to this event and during this event I sort of talked myself out of that. I don't feel like it was a waste of time because since I'm using tangential drive in Bigfoot, I did learn things about tangential drive that I'm carrying over into that, and I still don't hate the idea of an undercutter. Maybe I'll revisit it, we'll see. I've actually already started a lot of the work on the new version of Bigfoot. I've already ran it as a plastic ant at an event, and I'm working on building that up to a full combat ant. So be sure to subscribe so you can see how that went. And if you're still watching, then I'm sure you'd like another video from me, like this video on Hodag at that very same event. Hodag also had mixed results, but I think those fights will be a little bit more interesting to watch since they're beta weight fights. And thanks for watching.